Welcome again, everyone. Thank you for being here today, tonight, afternoon, wherever you are in the world, watching it on a recording perhaps. I know there are many, many things that are pulling at our attention these days. So the fact that you're here spending this time with us really means a lot. We are grateful and honored to spend this time with you. We are very eager to host this panel. We will have a second panel at the end of February, but this is our first official panel for Good Grief Network. And so we are excited to have these guests. We'll introduce them in a moment, but we're going to be focusing on collective care, what it is, why it's important during tumultuous times. I'll be the moderator tonight. I am Laura Schmidt. I'm the author of the newly released book, How to Live in a Chaotic Climate, 10 Steps to Reconnect with Ourselves, Our Communities, and Our Planet. And I'm also the founder of Good Grief Network, the nonprofit that is hosting this great event. It is a small organization, and our mission is to create space to gather in community, to process the painful feelings and realities of our time, and to commit to meaningful action. We run a lot of programs, specifically a 10-week resilience building program. We run a journaling program, facilitation trainings, and soon to be a membership program that will happen in the latter half of 2024. In times of ongoing disruption and transformation, we work to stay open, curious, and connected. We believe in the transformative power of emotional intelligence, of healing, and of practicing into new ways of being. We're here tonight with 3 speakers who are interested in similar questions. We'll have them introduce themselves in a few moments, but briefly, we want to say thank you to Bonita, Isabel, and Kailea for joining us tonight. Thank you also to Good Grief Network's executive director, who's monitoring the chat and will help with tech tonight, Sarah J.S. And we've created this panel to be interactive. We're going to be asking a lot of questions at the end or have space for questions to be asked and comments to come through. So we'll be in dialogue for a little bit and then have more of an interactive part at the latter part. Before hearing more from our panelists, Bonita has offered to lead us in a grounding exercise, which almost seems backwards that we're going to do grounding before introductions, but bear with us. I think we need to all arrive here in this space first. So over to you, Bonita. Please help us ground in this time and space.
Thank you, Laura. So I invite all of us to either close our eyes or have a gentle gaze and just take a moment to bring the attention to the breath, inviting the breath to be a little softer and a little slower. And in our mind's eye, in our hearts, just imagining a special place in the world that you love. Maybe it's a place that you get to visit daily. Maybe it's a place that you grew up around. And just take a moment to connect to this place, imagining yourself there. Imagining yourself sitting or standing or lying there. And in this place, noticing, sensing, imagining your connection with Mother Earth below. Imagining with the out-breath, with each out-breath, just relaxing, softening the body a little more, deepening into that contact with Mother Earth. And with each in-breath, inviting in, imagining, breathing in a sense of vitality, well-being, peace. So with the out-breath, relaxing, softening, rooting down into the Earth Mother, being received by her. And with the in-breath, inviting, imagining life energy, breathing in lightness, breathing in peace. And in this space, I just invite each of us to connect with why we're here, why we do the work that we do in the world, why we care so deeply. Just connecting with this love, connecting with this care, connecting with this sense of purpose. And imagining these like seeds in your hands. All that you sow in the world. These precious, precious seeds. And imagining with the breath, drawing life into these seeds. With the breath, imagining that these seeds will receive the sunshine and the water and will find the soil that they need to germinate, to grow, and to thrive. And so carrying these seeds with you this evening, just holding these seeds with our care, infusing these seeds with the energy, with the nourishment of this place. And so just taking 3 breaths here, soft breaths, again connecting with Mother Earth, connecting with ourselves, and connecting with our purpose. And then slowly just giving or imagining just some soft, gentle movements of the body. And as you're ready, slowly opening your eyes and bringing your attention back to our room. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonita. Thank you for offering this grounding exercise for us. I'd love for us to get an opportunity to meet each of the panelists and for each person to introduce themselves. My question for each of you, and we'll go one at a time, is to tell us more about you and the work that you do in the world. And maybe if you'd like to sprinkle in a transformative story about how you got on the path that you're on, I think that'd be really helpful. Maybe, Kailea, if you're comfortable, we can start with you and we'll spotlight you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Bonita. That was really, it's good to just take a minute there to rest the senses. And it's good to be here with everyone. It's evening for me, so I'm going to say good evening, but maybe some of you it's morning or afternoon. My name is Kailea Loften, and I use she, her pronouns. I am a Tahltan and Casca First Nations person and also a Black American. I am currently calling in from Tahltan territory where I live with my family. So we are located all the way up in the very northern part of British Columbia. I'm right off of the main highway. If you were to be driving to Alaska, you would pass by my house. So it's really cold and very snowy where I am right now. Um, my full-time job is I'm the community publisher with an Indigenous advocacy organization called Indian Collective. I've been with them for 3 years. The first few years I worked as their climate justice organizer, so I really helped build out some of the climate change work that they're currently doing. But while I was doing that, for the last 10 years, I've also worked in independent publishing. So I'm also the editor with an independent publishing project called Loam. And then that's how I ended up in this new position of doing publishing work over at Indian Collective. And over at Loam, a lot of what it is that we published are magazines and books and other print materials and resources on living through and navigating this moment in time. A lot of I would say maybe the most relevant publication to this evening and this conversation that we're going to be having is called Compassion in Crisis: Learning to Live in an Age of Disaster, which really aims to open up a conversation with individuals and community members on not just surviving, but honestly being able to, one, show up honestly to the world and this moment, but also be able to extend community care to those around you as we navigate all sorts of different moments of big and small unraveling in our own communities. Um, I Let's see, a transformative moment that brought me into this work. There's been so many little moments along the way, but one that I've written about and spoken on often, and really was the prequel to the book Compassion in Crisis coming out, came from finding out that I was pregnant 48 hours before the Tubbs fire broke out in Santa Rosa, California. And I, at the time, was living in Petaluma, California, which is just 20 minutes away. And so I always say that the trajectory of my parenting journey was really matched with the acceleration of the climate crisis. And I always felt like in California, especially, it was like we were living in the future in terms of seeing what was going to be happening in other places. And, now, the world is open to the idea, and I think much more aware and present with the fact that fire season is a global event. But back in 2017, I would share about what I was experiencing and living through while also carrying a child for the first time. And I could tell that it kind of went over people's heads, that they didn't really believe actually how bad it was. So that was certainly a transformative experience in terms of understanding that so much of what I had been studying around climate change had finally arrived, and it had arrived at my own doorstep. So I'm gonna press pause on myself there, and I would love to pass it over to Isabel.
Thank you very much, Kailea. And it's also evening here. So good evening and good morning or afternoon for everyone, wherever you are. Thank you also for your account of your experience. I remember having an experience in California as well with the fires. And thank you, Bonita. That was a very beautiful grounding exercise that you guided for us. Thank you. Very appreciated. So my name is Isabel Cavelier. I am Colombian, and I am currently in Bogota, Colombia, where I live and work. I am currently, or my main vital energy is currently dedicated to an initiative called Mundo Común, or a common world in English. A common world, Mundo Común, is about seeding and nurturing a culture of care that is rooted in interdependence, as the main way to respond to the polycrisis that we are seeing at the moment unravel in the world, that we are feeling and that we are seeing. And this is my daughter Gabriela, who's here with me tonight because it's bedtime. And so that's what Mundo Común does. We are doing this through both creating experiences for our the community that is dedicated to respond to the polycrisis, that can allow us to both restore ourselves and be and experience how we can be collectively regenerative beings. That's one part of our work, because we believe very deeply that if we would like to plant seeds in our deepest. Okay. Vale. Gracias, amor. If we plant seeds that we want them to grow in our deepest paradigms, we need to experiment it in our bodies, in our life. We need to not just talk about it. So that's one part of our work. And the other part relates to how we tell ourselves the stories of who we are, what the problem is, and therefore how we respond to the situations that we are facing. Out of the observation that we have, that a lot of the discourse, a lot of the narrative that goes around, and that is the soil for our culture, and that definitely is the ground for defining our responses, is really just reinforcing the paradigms that created the problem. So we would like to contribute to the stream of or the sediment that changes the stream of the rivers of culture, also through telling the story in a new way. So that's Mundo Común. That is now the present journey, but my journey also has been quite long, and I'll try to summarize my transformative experience. I had two for you. One is more of the human world, and one is of the other rest of nature. One of the human world is back when I was working on women's rights in Colombia, and my job was going around our country and interviewing women that had been victims of sexual violence in the conflict of Colombia. And it was a very touching time, very difficult time for me, and I was only listening in, but I'm human, so I could feel the grief, And one night I was in a town in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, a very small town that has had a very violent history. And we were honoring all of the daughters and all of the, I still cry when I tell the story, all of the sons and all of the daughters that weren't there anymore, of all of the women. And that they weren't there either because we knew they had passed away, or because they were disappeared. And the women had woven together, the women of the entire south of Colombia, a patchwork that was as big as the entire square of the town. It covered like a blanket of the entire square of the town, and around it were all the chairs, empty chairs all around, for each of their daughters and their sons, with a little candle. And yeah, I guess that moment for me was a breakthrough moment, because I think I could connect with the power of grief, connected to the ability of humans to create beauty, and it's still very painful and still very inspiring every time that I think of that moment. So I will leave it there, and I would love to pass it on to Bonita.
Thank you, Isabel. So beautiful and so powerful. So, Kwei, Bonjour, Anin, Sego, Nimen Hao, Ni Hao, Bonsoir, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, friends. I am so touched and moved already to be here. So grateful to Laura and Sarah and the Good Grief Network for hosting us and just to be part of this conversation with Isabel and Kailea. I I want to just really bring you to where I am. And so where I live is in a place that we call Perth, Ontario, and this is unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory. And I start from this place. If we were here together in a circle, I would invite you to take your shoes off to well, actually there's snow outside, so maybe we'd keep our boots on, but I would bring you to the garden because my work and my life, my community work, my spiritual life have really been rooted in and come out of this garden that has been my home for almost 15 years. And so I start from that place because this is my root now in my life. And so a little bit about me and my background. I've taught permaculture, ecological design for the better part of a decade. I've shared nonviolent communication. I'm also the author of a book called, oh, maybe, I don't know if you can see that, the blur function is on, so you can't see it. Embers of Hope, Embracing Life in an Age of Ecological Destruction and Climate Chaos. And in the last year, I've had the pleasure of mentoring facilitators through Youth Climate Lab, and I'm currently the Gen Z Advisors Program Lead for Climate Mental Health Network. So I carry a lot of baskets, and I think a transformative experience that has that has infused my work with so much depth and so much richness. I've had the gift of being able to support people in hospice and to accompany two loved ones who were dying. And so my friend, who I'll call Catherine, she received a diagnosis of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, around 2011. And for many people, that's a terminal diagnosis. And it was such a gift to be able to be part of Catherine's inner circle of support, and just to be with her, to learn with her, to see her grow and heal, and to also grow and heal myself as well. And so Catherine's intention was to heal. Her vision was to recover her health entirely, and she she did her best to focus as much of her energy and her attention on her healing journey. And so in her daily life, she focused as much as she could on gratitude and just taking the time to appreciate a sunset, a meal with a loved one, a beautiful piece of music. And she also did her best to be present with the roller coaster of emotions that move through her in this journey. And a few months into the process, she redid her paperwork. She redid her power of attorney over healthcare, and she showed me the paperwork. And she said, "I want you to be aware of this, and I also don't want you to dwell on this because I hope we won't need it." And what really struck me was that even with the awareness of having this potentially terminal diagnosis that was hanging over her, she put the majority of her energy and her attention and her daily actions into trying to enrich her own life and enrich the lives of the people around her. And so she used all of the time that she had to the best of her ability to create positive change. And when months and months later, and actually she surprised her doctors and nurses just how long she was able to continue, and be independent and not have pain medications and just still be so vibrant and active in her life. And at some point, when it became clear that she was dying, she she took the time to really make peace with her life and with her dying, with her death. And to me, this has become such a metaphor for how I want to live and for how I want to hold this time in the world, how I want to show up and support other people in this polycrisis. It's just really about, and so in my book, one of the core threads is just really trying to practice both grief and actively cultivating hope in our lives. It's about balancing acceptance over the things that we cannot control and taking action in all the ways with, and just really making the most of every opportunity that we have in every day and in every moment. And that medicine continues to support me, to inspire me. Just the preciousness of of being mortal, the preciousness of dying, and the preciousness of living and living fully and and living in community, just living with an open heart and being in relationship with everyone and all the beings around us. I will pass it back to Laura.
Thank you, Bonita. Thank you, Isabel and Kailea. Uh, I am picking up on some threads already and very excited to enter into a conversation with the three of you. The panel tonight, it is called Collective Care in the Polycrisis, Building Climate Resilient Communities. And it was really fun in the planning call because we had to even take a step back and say, what does care mean? Why is it important? How might we use that as a framework for change? And so I think it's an important place to start. And because we want this to be a conversation between the three panelists, I wonder if this is sparking anything for anyone, and if we can just have a conversation about what does care mean? What does that look like? Why is it important? Why might this be a framework for us moving forward?
I wrote a few things down, had some notes. I process really well when listening to people, just writing on the side. And when I was kind of thinking about what is care and what is collective care, and why is this a framework that we should be considering, not only as useful, but actually as maybe a main world philosophy or lens for how it is that we're even approaching our life. A few things that came up are, collective care for me. It's really about we consciousness, and it's about leaning towards the center and actually designing a world that places those who are most vulnerable at the center. And then I was thinking a little bit more about, to back up, I wanted to briefly share. I spent 2.5 years sitting on a climate commission as a commissioner for a city, and it was called the Climate Action Commission. And I kept saying, we really should change our name to be the Climate Justice Commission, because if we only approach designing, the city, designing, trying to approach designing around climate change through this idea of action, we actually are going to miss out on so many people. You know, the idea of action being a really quick way of approaching things, maybe a surface level way of approaching things. Um, and I kept advocating and asking, can we there's a nuance here. If we really were to be designing with a justice lens, what we would ultimately end up with is designing a world and a city and a community and neighborhoods that meet all, everyone's needs. And so for me, just to kind of get us started, that's what comes up when I think about collective care and why it is that we should be having a framework that encompasses this idea of who should be placed at the center. And then, as a last little thought, one of the things that's come up so much, in my parenting journey, and I think probably anyone who's a parent can relate to this, is it's actually the ultimate it's the ultimate practice in decentering yourself. And I had this thought a few years ago that actually it's almost like a reprieve to not be so self-centered, to actually be moving with my own little family unit as this organism all together, and how absolutely antithetical it is in American or Western culture to decenter the self. We see this coming up so much in influencer culture. We see this obviously in human supremacy. We see this in white supremacy. And it's really the water that we're swimming in. So it's a challenge. And maybe even some people might look down on this idea that you should not be at the center of the world or even your own thoughts process all the time. So I have found actually that there's just a lot of, maybe it's an exhale around this idea that it's not just about me, it's about our family, it's about a community, it's about those that are around me. So those are some initial thoughts, and I think Bonita's jotting down some things, and I see Isabel nodding, so I'll pass it over.
Would you like to go, Bonita, or should I? Okay. Thank you, Kailea. That's a very beautiful way to put it. I had also taken some notes, and yeah, I think the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of care nowadays, after having heard and read and felt about it intentionally for some time, is that care is a non-innocent concept. It's not an obvious concept, and it can like move or like shift around very easily and very quickly, and I don't think we should be unaware of that or relate to care from an easy perspective. It's more, we were talking about this when we were preparing for this panel, that for me is more, it's a thick practice, care. It's a thick, ordinary and also extraordinary practice. And for me, it's a concept that is pregnant with beauty, but also huge challenging entanglements. Is not always an easy place, care. Because as much as it is relational, right? And even, I thought, even when we talk self-care, it is relational in the end, right? We are never single. We are always multiply entangled in multiple assemblages of life. So it's never individual. It's always collective, and so it's inherently relational, and as such, it has all of these faces. It's effective. It's aesthetic. It's ethical. It's political, and it's material. It's very material. And it can also take us to very uncomfortable places and in places of immense relief. And all of that is like in this big I want to call it messy, but it's not messy. It's like thick dough that care can be. And this made me think, okay, if this is how care is, or made me more than think, my reflections are collective care as a framework for change. That is your question, Laura, can have all sorts of appearances in the world that are not necessarily or not automatically good. And we need to be very intentionate how we relate to it. I could think of collective care practices that end up being isolationist. Like I could think about a community or a group of belonging to a particular idea that decides they are going to collectively care for each other, but not the rest. And so for me, the let's say the understanding that dawned on me as I was thinking for this panel is that care is a desirable route for a change or a framework for change only if it is preceded by the understanding that boundaries are never strict, borders don't really exist, that we are not relating to care from a place of isolation, whatever that isolation is in the concentric circles of my identity. So it's the question of, or it's a question of how we can approach care from a mentality that is non-dualistic and not in reinforcing separatedness, division, all of this us versus them sort of ripples that can be, as you were saying, Kailea, they are the water in which we are swimming, the us versus them, and you named a few, right? So because care is non-innocent, it's almost like we need to reclaim care and open it up to its beauty through the awareness of that porosity that interbeing in the world actually is in reality. Yeah, I think that's it. I see Laura laughing. I don't know if that was too much, but I think that was, yeah, that was my threading of tonight on care. Thank you.
So there are a couple of threads that I would like to try and weave together from Kailea and from Isabel. I also really resonate with this, with the experience of care as extending beyond our perceived separation. And so when I was thinking about care and just preparing for this panel, the words that came to me first. So as a permaculture practitioner, we often talk about earth care, people care, future care. And in climate circles, more in the last couple of years, I've been using more of the words self-care, community care, and climate care. And I think ultimately, regardless of the word, to me, it's really about. So Isabel, you used the word non-dual, and I think for me, it's really, I think for me, inherently, even when I say self-care, I actually mean this sense of, or I experience and intuit this sense of well-being that goes beyond my perceived small me. And I think one of my biggest teachers in this was, and continues to be, our garden. So we've been on this little piece of land since 2010, and we grow a lot of our own food, and I've grown and harvested a lot of my medicines here. And what I've learned over the years is that this is this is it's a relational practice. It's and for me, it goes deeper. It's more than it's not just something that I can see or touch or somebody else that or someone else can observe. It's really about um a sense of responsibility, a sense of reciprocity. And when I'm trying to grow food that is healthy for me, my responsibility extends beyond my physical body. Um, and it extends beyond the plant, the one, two, or 100 plants that I'm in relationship with. It's this whole ecosystem, and for me, that's about biological community and it's about spiritual community as well. And I think when I think about Isabel, when you talk about kind of like, cautioning us around care, I think for myself, I I'm aware that I think care can be so simple, and yet it can also, so let me flip that. In this last few years, I've really learned to and I've challenged myself to create more of what I need and share more of what I need. And so before launching my book, I realized that I was going to be in more spaces supporting people around just in their emotions around the climate crisis and the polycrisis. And I knew that I needed support for myself as well too. And so I started a support group with friends and peers in the community. And similarly, in this last few months, when when the situation in Gaza started just blowing up on our screens, I realized how little I knew about the history of the region and how torn I felt. And so I gathered together a group of friends and peers who also wanted to learn, who also wanted to take action. And so we've been meeting online once a month to share resources, to teach each other how to contact government representatives and just to be there for one another to share that emotional support. And so for me, it's been this kind of this flow of giving and receiving, creating what I need, putting it out into the world, and also being open to receiving that back. And I also realized that I am privileged, that I live in a safe home, that I have food in my belly, my family is safe. And so it's easier for me to, and so that gives me a little bit of that gives me more wiggle room in my life, that gives me more energy and space to create those opportunities for others. And so I recognize that privilege, and so that is kind of the cautionary piece around it, right? Like, it's not we're not all in a position to have that an abundance of resources in order to give it away. And I also want to invite us to imagine care as a simple practice as well too, that we can have care be as it can grow, and we can give it as much space as we have for it, or it can be just something that we tiny that we do in the moment. And it could be as simple as smiling at a stranger on the street, or just checking in on an elderly neighbor. It doesn't have to cost us very much. So I'll pause there, and I think I'm going to just pass it back to one of the others.
I just wanted to jump in and say, Isabella, I loved when you said that care is political. There's so much in that for me. And over at the publishing space that I work at, Loam, we so much of our publications touch on this idea of what is soft and what is nurturing as actually being where it is that we can source power from, and how there's so much power that is actually overlooked, specifically in care workers. And in, again, like in some of my like policy and advocacy work that I've done, there's been a lot of imagining, like what if we actually had an economy that was designed around care workers? More often than not, care workers tend to be femmes, so we're looking at even just the way that um, there's like a wealth income gap that might be bridged, investment brought into communities that have oftentimes been overlooked. But I also know that it would immediately disrupt the status quo, because all of a sudden, care workers, their entire worlds are based around the people they're caring for, right? That's the priority. So I love this idea of, like, I like to do just big imagination. What if we had an economy that was designed around actually resourcing those who give so much? And I can't help but think about the ways that I know for myself, when I'm actually giving proper care either to a community, to the land that I live on, to my child, it requires me to show up a lot slower. And I was thinking a little bit about what you had shared, Bonita, in terms of just what you had, these like potent lessons you had gleaned from your friend as she had gone through her transition. um, in order to actually show up with presence and true care, we have to show up really slowly. We have to slow down our nervous systems. We have to oftentimes slow down our ability. Our ability to hold patience has to do with like our own ability to regulate our emotional space. And I also think, it requires us to sense maybe what is not even being spoken at some moments in times, which means like we have to be so quiet in ourselves that we can hear what is not being said. So all in all, to me, it's like, oh, that's a world where we're actually moving slower altogether. And it's a world where we're not actually designed to continue moving around capitalism. So, kind of to go back to this main question of why, like, how might care be considered a framework for change, or why we should be considering care as a framework for change. For me, it's like there's a lot of threads we could pull out here, but I actually see it as an opportunity to be designing away from capitalism.
Yeah, that's right. You are making so many beautiful points, both of you. And I would maybe just dream big with you, Kailea, and say, not just around care workers, but just based on the paradigm of care altogether, right? And not just our economic system, but our whole way of design, like human design writ large. Because I think, or at least let me bring that to something very concrete, and to your beautiful point, Bonita, just simple. Think, how solutions are just elegant and simple. So for me, it's also just asking myself the question, and I would also like to say, I don't always have the answer, and sometimes I see myself having had the wrong answer, but it's always asking myself, is this what I'm going to do? Is it careful? Is it being careful? Is it being extractive, or is it being careful? And sometimes I look back and I'm like, oof, this wasn't really careful. And I think we also need to be honest, not only slower, but I think there's also a point of how we nurture that dream that you're talking about, Kailea, in our own daily lives, because how else how else are we going to expand this paradigm shift? And so it's, for me, it's always asking myself this question and recognizing that there's often times when there are slippages. It's easy to fall into the main sort of just the dominant system's own ways of operating, and just going back to that feeling of, okay, yeah, I'm gonna, I'm gonna fail sometimes. Look at that time when I failed with compassion for myself, for the others that are also trying, sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding. And that's what I meant when with this idea that care is a thick practice. It has all of this possibility in it, and that's also why it is so political, because with a small act of care you can be super disruptive, when it's completely unexpected that you do it. I don't know of a particular idea now, but it can be something super delicate and small, that is just not expected in that place, in a boardroom, and then you take the liberty of giving more affectionate physical care to someone else, and it's just not expected. And sometimes that small act of care can be profoundly disruptive and have deep implications. And while it doesn't seem like it's political in that layer of reality, it's actually profoundly disruptive. And the reason why it is political is because it is a terrain of tension in society currently, whereby a dominant paradigm is struggling to continue operating. And as more and more of us start having the consciousness and the courage to take the leap forward and actually just have this little disruptive acts of care, it's like it's a reclaiming of a territory, right? It's a reclaiming of a metaphorical and very physical territory, that we are actually doing by taking that courageous leap forward.
I am loving this conversation, and I've seen folks on the panel writing some notes, and so we can hang here for a couple more minutes and see what else is coming up to your mind, bubbling up for you. And then in about 5 minutes, I think that we open it up to some questions and see what the audience members have and what's stirring in them. So if there's something wanting to be said in the next 5 minutes, great. And if not, we'll invite everybody else to say what's on their minds as well.
Maybe I have one more thing. Because care is a powerful place to weave transformation from. It's also a place, or it's also critical to think about it in terms of how we think. I loved how you said, Bonita, care, climate care, community care, self-care. And can I add to that, thinking care? Yeah. And there are many people many very enlightened people who are weaving the thinking on and with care. For me, two of them that have been very inspiring recently are Arturo Escobar and Maria Puig. I will give you the references at the end. Maria in particular, she uses the expression matters of care to replace matters of fact. And it's very deep, and I just wanted to bring about the fact that it's not just about how we operate in the world, how we design our systems, our economy, our everything else that we design, but it's how we relate to our own thinking, that can be done from a place of care. Is a deep seed, I guess, of those that you beautifully planted with us at the beginning, Bonita.
I would like to share about we've been touching on the multidimensional layers of care, and care being political, and care being personal, and care being relational, and I think the place where this comes alive so much for me is my garden. And I wish you were all here, even though it's dark outside now. I would love for all of us to roam around in the darkness out there. So w- in tending this little piece of land for about 13 years, 14 years now, we have we have created a lot of change here. So some of what it looks like on the outside, some of what we've physically done differently. So as permaculture designers, as regenerative practitioners, we have brought in a lot of organic matter. We've fostered a lot of biodiversity, brought in a lot of different species of edible and medicinal plants. We've designed very intentionally with a lot of slow reflection and a lot of observation. We have given a lot of space to plants that show up on their own, animals that show up on their own. And a few years into this process, I was coming back from a weekend workshop, and my friend Brittany was driving me, and she hadn't seen the garden in a little while. And so we got home and we're wandering around the garden, and she said, "Huh." And so it was in probably in July. It was in the evening. And she said, "Did you know that your garden has a lot more fireflies than in the surrounding gardens?" And I kind of looked at her a bit skeptically. And so we went out to the sidewalk. We walked up the street in one direction. We came back down the street in the other direction. And I looked around. We came back to my garden. I said, "Yeah, you're right. I didn't realize that." And for me, this has been it's this annual celebration in June and July. It is a celebration of our ecological life skills that we have learned to do something to improve the health of this little piece of greenery. And so the lots the the lots around us are mostly grass. And I can show a few pictures. Actually, let me show a few pictures while I'm talking here. Um, so it was mostly grass when we started here. And over the years, by cultivating more fertility, building more soil, fostering more biodiversity, it has become this place where life is thriving more and more. And it's changing. It's definitely changing. And it's still teaching me, and I'm still learning. And I think what is really powerful for me is that in in my work, I find that so much of my work in the world is I don't get to see the impact or the outcomes of the seeds that I sow, the metaphorical seeds, the energetic seeds that I sow out there. And the fireflies are this kind of annual event where the ecosystem is speaking very loudly to me, saying that keep it up. You did it. You're doing it. Please keep doing it. And it's a balm for my heart to not just receive encouragement and gratitude from the people around me, but from the life, the communities of life around me, from because fireflies, they're sparkly light show is only for it's only for the last few weeks of their lives. So they spend a year to 2 years in their larval form in the soil, eating organic matter. They need a space to winter over. And when they're doing that sparkly thing, they're looking for mates and then they die. And so what we've done is we've created a space for them where they have been happy and well and thriving and they're able to continue another generation and yet another generation. And for me, that's just so that speaks to that kind of the multiplicity of those layers of care where this is the place, so we just asked, this is the place for my food. And really, this is also the place for my heart. And this is the place where other life gets to thrive because I am slowly learning to slow down and to listen more and to, as you said, Kailea, to bring others into the center, to center that care and that well-being, put others at the center, those that are the most vulnerable.
We have some questions coming in, and I wonder if folks can speak to the ones that that are coming in. The first one that I see is someone just moved to a new place and they're struggling to find people and place to give and receive care here. Do you have examples of how to find it, how to establish it, how to connect to care already happening in a new place?
Sure. Yeah. And I also see that Micah below said, similar to question above, in an existing community that already has people care present, how do you recommend we help foster resilience and greater discussion around ecology and climate care? And I just want to say that to Allison and Micah, I have so much empathy for moving to a new place. I, so much of my experience living in California for 7 years, I felt really new and I was going through a lot of culture shock. I originally grew up in the Hawaiian Islands and now I'm in it again because I just moved up to northern BC to a very, very tiny little community only in October or so. Oh, my son's now here, but we'll see what happens. I'm gonna put myself on mute and actually just pass it over to others as my 5-year-old comes in and probably says a few things kind of noisily.
Are either of you interested in picking up where Kailea paused?
I think what I would add is that what I've found in my experience is one of the best ways to find my people is to volunteer. So to look for opportunities in the community where people are asking for help and support, or to create those opportunities. So whether that's through a potluck or, regular potlucks or regular discussion groups or book clubs or so, yeah, just I think I I've I've found so much, and I've been so enriched by reaching out to people, especially through volunteer work and especially through places where people are potentially needing and seeking more support. So I would I would start there. Kylie, did you want to pick that up?
Yes, I apologize. Yeah, I totally have a 5-year-old and they like to bust in. Um, and I also just saw, Allison, that you had said, I just moved to a new place and I'm struggling to find people. Okay, yeah. Oh, and Jessica, you said relate to this also having lived overseas for 15 years, simply joining. Yeah, okay. Um, so one of the things I wanted to share in terms of moving to a new place and trying to figure out like how do you plug in or yeah, what is the best way to show up? I know it's really easy to want to start something new and it's actually I think as a way one of the better ways to show up is to show up really slowly And I know that that is probably hard to hear. But I've noted, one of the things I've noticed having lived in a few different places is that generally there is something, and it might be really quiet. It might be something that's happening just in someone's living room. Maybe it's something that's happening in a more public sphere, but every community has its culture and its ways of being and its ways of doing together already. And so I found that, it's best to actually show up with that ability to really listen and to ask questions and to be really willing to receive direction. And then, if you've done all of those things and you're really not finding that those spaces are existing, then I think it's totally appropriate and fine to try to generate something. Um, I think it's, in terms of not having maybe proximity to physical support systems that you're used to, it can be, I also think it can be helpful, to try to cultivate some of that support via long distance with friends and family initially. But moving is hard. It's just one of those things. Most of the time it takes time. It takes time to find your feet. It takes time to figure out what role you're going to play in the community and to understand all of the roles that are already being played. And this is also coming from someone who grew up in a really small, transient community, a place where there was generational relationships and then a ton of people that were constantly coming through and oftentimes had a lot of ideas about how things should be happening or what they could be doing, without first taking that opportunity to really lean in and listen to those of us who are really from that place and had established connection and relationship. So those are some initial thoughts, but I had started out by just saying that I have a lot of empathy for those of you that might be in this process. One of the things I've had to learn how to become very good, I would say, intimately close with is loneliness. That's been a really big part of my adult life, learning how to be present with myself, how to hold myself up in dignity, in a space where maybe people don't know who I am. They don't have a clear understanding of what I might have to offer, or just that I'm different. I'm different looking, or the culture of the space that I just came from is really different from the culture of the place that I'm coming into. So yeah, a lot of empathy and compassion if that's your experience right now. And there was also someone had asked a question too on like how to cultivate care for our planet and care for our people. And you had said that, and I have found this to be true, it's harder for technical folks or decision makers who are tend to be in like a camp. There's like a clear idea about the best way or the only way to be bringing about change or approaching their world and their work. And I one of the things I often advocate for are more bridge walkers, people who are really willing to make friends and build relationships in truly unusual spaces with very different kinds of people. And that's something we don't have enough of in this world. There's not enough people that are really willing to um, maybe gain a perspective or again listen. That's something that is, I think we can all attest to, especially in this political climate. So I have found that when engaging with people who are more technical, those that are in decision making or policy making positions, um, it's easier to actually, cultivate a relationship and try to have some of those like one-on-one spaces. People I have found are actually really willing to listen in a one-on-one type of dynamic. Um, and so the work of relationship building, I think, is something that all of us can aspire to. I know it's especially because the moments are urgent, the issues are urgent. Obviously, we're navigating multiple genocides taking place in different countries at this moment in time. can feel like, if you have that opportunity to maybe be even engaging or in a room with a decision maker or policy maker, like that's the moment. But I have found, again, especially if you are working in policy and advocacy, it's a long game. And what you're actually trying to do is build into some form of a relationship where at some point someone, you can, oh God, in organizing spaces, what we say, just to break it down really quick, is when you're actually trying to engage or talk to someone new, you should be letting them speak 70% of the time and you speak 30% of the time. And the majority of what you should be speaking are questions, and what kind of questions you should be bringing forward are elicitive questions. So you're trying to draw a person out of themselves and support them in creating connections for themselves around a bigger issue area. And I think that that's something you can bring into like an organizing space, and also it's something you can bring into a new community when you're trying to make new friends. Give them 70% of that airtime, take 30% to ask truly genuine, curious questions about who they are, where they're from, the community that you're landing in. So those are a few little points, and I would love to turn it over to the others.
That's so useful, Kailea. I was thinking, how did I used to do that? I used to work a lot on that space, and I was also wondering how was I approached. And I mean, I guess my answer was always, I'm a human, just like you. I'm interested. I'm curious. But I wanted to pivot a little bit and address Hannah's question on violence being necessary for systemic change. I think it's a very deep question, and one that I find really hard to answer. And recently I heard, I heard a very interesting conversation on the podcast. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's called For the Wild. The host of For the Wild was interviewing Molly Young, who is a disciple of Joanna Macy. And the interview is beautiful. And there comes a point when she says something that really struck me. She said, there's no such thing as human nature, right? Humans are very malleable, and it's our choice how we decide to be in the world. So Hannah, you're making me think, we were just weaving with the conversation prior, we were talking about being careful, also being care in our thinking, right? I think careful in our thinking, or thinking carefully, or care thinking, care, like how do we relate to the ideas in a care-centered way? And while I don't think there is a final answer to that question, might violence be needed? When I come to these kinds of questions, my answer always goes to, I choose. It's an ethical choice. I choose to nurture the possibility that change comes about through gentle, careful, loving ways. That's my choice, and that's what I nurture every day, rather than trying to nurture the thinking around why violence may be necessary, right? Because the more we nurture a thought, the more it grows, that seed grows, and that seed becomes a reality. And so I know that this is not a full answer to your question, because you could go on endlessly on whether this or that, violence or care, like that's another duality. I think it's likely that all of it is included in our human multiplicity, in our human capacity. All of it is in us. Yeah. Sorry, I'm full of references tonight. You're reminding me of another book. It's called on the Part of the Other. It's a Karl Emanuel Schmidt book. He writes a biography of Adolf Hitler. It's a novel, and he writes two novels that are parallel. One of them is Adolf Hitler, that is the story we all know. And the other one is an invented story where Adolf Hitler was accepted in the fine arts school in Vienna. He wasn't accepted in reality, but in his book, he has these two parallel lives. So he imagines the world where Adolf Hitler was accepted to be an artist. What would have happened? And he tells the story in the first person. And what that book taught me is anyone, it's in me, and anything is in me, or the potential for anything is in anyone. Yes. And so if the potential for that violence is in anyone, even in me, right? Why would I nurture that? And when I choose to nurture a loving way to bring about transformation, then I am making less and less probable that the transformation will come about through violence. And so that's, I think, a moral, not just choice, it's like a moral imperative, right? That I decide to abide by. And I was also wanting to address Katie's question on the decision makers, but from like a complementary point to Kailea, because I loved your very practical thinking, Kailea. I was recently having a conversation with a friend about where do I put my energy? How does it happen with ecosystems? How do they regenerate? How does it happen with a forest? What's easier, to go to very arid, like eroded land and try there and put all my energy there to bring about a new forest? Or do I do it from the forest that exists, the relict forest, and let it grow? And she's a biologist, and she was telling us, definitely, if you have a relict forest, I don't know if that's a word in English, but a reminding forest, like a natural forest that is still there, standing forest, you would start by really taking care of what is there. And then you have something called pioneer species that you start caring for, that start expanding from that core of existing forest. And so, the whole conversation went to the analogy of, because we were thinking, with which community do we start in terms of human community? And then I think our conclusion was, well, it is worth investing energy also in really nurturing all of those humans that are already in the forest of thinking like this, not necessarily urgently having to go directly to those who think so completely different, like relating to them, bridging, of course, those are our pioneering among us that are, that we need to care for most, right? They are the ones building that, extending the forest out. But it also makes sense to really nurture our own community so that we can then have the pioneers that are ready to bridge. So yeah, I think I'll pause there and give the speaking words back to the others.
We have 10 minutes left, and so I'm wondering if there is something that has been in the questions or something that has arisen, bubbling up. Otherwise, we can start moving to a kind of a closing out.
Something here that Sandora had said around where it, as I'm understanding it, there's a prioritization that you're taking into consideration right now around where and who and how you want to spend your energy and time. And what I actually see in what you shared is, I think there's a reflection for all of us here in terms of considering where and who and how we each want to spend our time. For some of us, we really are wanting to move into, try to create and, change from within old systems, old paradigms, and that is admirable and also exhausting work. And then there are people who would like to build new systems on the outside of those systems, and that is also very admirable and exhausting work. And I also think that there are moments in my own organizing journey where I have really just wanted to pick that low-hanging fruit. I'm not looking for that really tough relationship. I want to just focus on the people who I already know are on the journey. They're going to be passengers with me on the journey, and that's also okay. I think that it's important to remember there are seasons and phases in life, but also not all the work is our work. we only have so much energy. Our timelines are finite here on this earth. And I think it's important to consider who you are and what you want to give. And yeah, I know comparison can come up, but we have to be okay with letting that go. And I maybe this was, I think, briefly touched on too. Hannah, you had shared about social change thinkers who you really respect, but who insist that violent revolution is necessary for real systemic change. And I think that this is a really big question and would take a lot more to unpack, but I think it's important to um, study revolution and revolutions that have happened within the United States and also outside of the United States. And maybe you have, but this is something that I would, my own response at this moment in time. And, considering that I come from, one side of my family are First Nations people, the other side of the family are Black people. And so really I'm this meeting point of two lineages that have undergone systemic and intentional genocide and colonization. um, I'm really grateful to my ancestors who fought back and made it so that I actually am existing here in this body and in this form. I am not for the perpetuation of trauma and violence, but I do believe that there is a time and a space when people are undergoing extermination for there to be that opportunity for them to fight back at moments and times. So I'm going to leave it at that. There's so much more that I could add in there, but I don't think it's a black and white situation. Um, yeah, I'll pause that on that.
Really grateful for that nuance that just came up because I was feeling the tension within myself too, especially with what's happening in the world right now. I think we need a whole another panel discussion on violence, nonviolence, and yeah, just how we move forward in this world and preserve that dignity and preserve life and what that looks like. How do we continue to follow and support your respective inspiring work? Yes, I did put some links. I'll put the links in there again. I know that I took a whole page of notes and have a lot to digest. And so I'm wondering, as we wrap up, if y'all can take 1 minute and actually, let's just pause for a second. And when your pause feels complete, if you can just give us one little nugget of something that you're going to take away from this conversation that maybe we can hold on to as well. And then we have a poem before we leave.
I think what's coming to me right now, I'm thinking back to the pieces around kind of care being thick, and I'm thinking about this question around violence or non-violence and just the nuances within that. And I think the place that I find myself is just really, I think the other word that's resonating in my head is just being honest with ourselves. I think you said that, Isabel, earlier. And so just really pushing my edges, really asking myself, am I am I holding back out of my own comfort? Am I um like just it's the because I think it's care is so nuanced, violence and nonviolence is so nuanced. And so I don't think in any situation there is an easy, clear-cut answer. And for myself, things that in the past I might have said, oh no, that's too much for me. Oh no, I don't want to step out or speak out in that way because I don't feel comfortable, or that doesn't seem appropriate, or that seems too aggressive or too violent. I'm really asking myself those questions again and again in real time. Do I feel called to speak out now? And every situation is is different. And so I think maybe part of it is about just really centering ourselves um, in our hearts and centering ourselves in our integrity, so just really being mindful in each moment of choice, whether we are speaking and acting for the highest good and for the highest care of as many and as much as we can expand ourselves to hold in that moment, and more than my own personal comfort, but can I, if I expand and hold more, what is the next best action, the next best step for me in this moment?
Thank you, Bonita.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for the beautiful questions and also the very inspiring answers and nuances and subtlety and careful thinking, careful speaking. From that place of integrity, I think one thing that I go with is that it takes courage to open up time. Kailea was talking about how being able to listen really requires us to be slower and take time. But I think it takes courage, but it is part of the revolution. It's the deliberate act to open up time to slow down so that we can give and receive reciprocally care, but also to play more, just to give space for music, for art, for poetry, for conversation 101 that is deep, rather than just wait for that time to come to our lives, because life, it just comes rushing in. So it's a daily muscle to practice. And I keep on failing, day after day, but I keep on trying to open up that fissure in our daily lives and then making it wider and wider.
Thank you, Isabel.
Something I was thinking about before this conversation, and I'm still thinking about now at the end, and is just how important the work of the Good Grief Network is. And one of the most, I would say, like the read of the year for me in 2023 is Gabor Mate's The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture, which I'm sure some of you have heard of or read. It's so big. um, but how important it is to actually let emotion express and move through our body, as an act of actually staying not only emotionally healthy, but also physically and mentally healthy. And so that's so much of how I think of what the Good Grief Network is doing and is offering, is containers and spaces to support that work moving through us. And when I consider care and just the theme of this container that we've been in together, there's so much, I think, in I'm in a process, I think, right now of really learning how to do that, learning how to care for myself, someone coming out of a decade of organizing. And so much of what I shared on it, just in terms of even slowing down and considering how it is that we want to design or redesign communities and societies around care workers, is really coming from my own process that's very alive in me at this moment in time. I'm really slowing down, and I'm really learning how to say no. And I just I would like to offer that. I know that we're probably in a group here of people who cared immensely of people who are sensitive, of people who are attending to and noting and watching everything unravel all at once. And I just want to put it out there that it's okay for you to take space and take time to have your own process. It's okay to take time to live your own life. Yeah, there are seasons, there are phases. What is not okay is making ourselves ill and sick over the work as well. So it was a pleasure getting the opportunity to spend a few hours with you all.
Kailea. Thank you to our three panelists. Thank you so much to the people who came. Thank you to the people who are going to watch this recording. And before we go, we have a blessing that will be read for us from Isabel. I am full of so much gratitude that I think I'm done with words, and I'm just going to sit back and listen to this blessing and leave you all with gratitude. So Isabel, if you will read for us, I'd love that.
Thank you. I am also so full of gratitude. So I will leave this poem. It's by John O'Donoghue, from a collection of poems that is called To Bless the Space Between Us. And so I'll just let the poem speak, and in profound gratitude. It's a different one than the one I had chosen, but I'll read a different one. It's not the one for equilibrium. I'm going to read the one for belonging, but that's okay. You have to. It's called For Belonging. May you listen to your longing to be free. May you listen to your longing to be free. May the frames for your belonging be generous enough for your dreams. May you arise each day with a voice of blessing whispering in your heart. May you find a harmony between your soul and your life. May the sanctuary of your soul never become haunted. May the sanctuary of your soul never become haunted. May you know the eternal longing that lives at the heart of time. May there be kindness in your gaze when you look within. May you never place walls between the light and yourself. May you allow the wild beauty of the invisible world to gather you, mind you, and embrace you in belonging.
Thank you for sharing that poem.
Blessing for belonging.
Thank you. All right, folks, take great care as we wrap up tonight, and we will send out this recording in the next few days, along with a promotion for Bonita's book. If you buy the ebook, she's donating the profits to Good Grief Network, and so that will come along in an email. Thank you so much for your time and energy to the three panelists, and may you all go slow and nurture your connections throughout the night and throughout the days coming. Thank you, folks.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So grateful.
Grateful for you all. Thank you, Bonita, Kailea, Isabel.